I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich, and I like to talk about leadership and engineering. Hey, in this video today, I'd like to talk about organizational commitment, about some of the research related to that, and also it'll touch a little bit on why people quit. At any rate, so there's two broad categories of research efforts. One's called attitudinal, the other's called behavioral, and the idea is the attitudinal research kind of get to what's sort of the mental part of commitment, and the behavioral models look more at what are sort of the behaviors, particularly behaviors related to quitting and leaving an organization. So the seminal attitudinal work was by Mowday, Steers, and Porter in 1979, and they were trying to get to just what is organizational commitment. And that's an important paper because their data set was enormous. They had over 2,500 participants from a wide variety of industries, and really some solid work. And first of all, what is organizational commitment? They defined it as the relative strength of an individual's identification with and involvement in a particular organization. And furthermore, they had they found there was three factors related to organizational commitment, and they ended up developing the OCQ, Organizational Commitment Questionnaire. So that's kind of interesting. So if you actually wanted to measure this, you could actually go ahead and use this questionnaire to measure the degree to which people are committed. And their three components were the degree to which members embrace the organization's goals and values. The second one is the degree to which members are willing to the phrase they use is exert considerable effort on behalf of the organization. And finally, the degree to which members want to maintain membership in the organization. A little bit later, Allen and Meyer in 1990, they sort of refined that a little bit. They proposed a three-component model of organizational commitment. And so like Mowday and friends, they had three components, but they expand a little bit. So they talked about affective, continuance, and normative. Affect is like an umbrella term for the concept of mood and emotion and all those touchy-feely things. And so they say, well, there's an affective component of organizational commitment, and that boils down to simply, do you want to be part of it? The continuance part has to do with the cost of leavings, like, well, I would leave except for I'd lose stock options, or I'd lose my pension, or something like that. And then the normative aspect is sort of like the degree to which you feel like you have an obligation to stay. Any rate, then moving over to the behavioral models. So Mobley, Horner, and Hollingsworth in 1978, they proposed a model that looks like this on your screen. And looking at it, what they've got is the key thing here in the top is job satisfaction, and then there's sort of this cascading thing of job satisfaction moving to thinking of quitting, intention to search, intention to quit or stay, so that's kind of a decision point, then actually quitting or staying. And they've got some other factors here, age and tenure, which seem to be a factor, and also just the perceived probability of finding an acceptable alternative. And you see what I mean when I say this one's more behavioral. It talks about steps. And one of the things I think is really interesting about this model is, when you look at this intention to quit or stay, that's sort of the, that's a complex issue. So say, when you ask somebody, well, why did you quit? They may give you one reason. Well, I quit because of this. But the truth of the matter is, it's almost never one reason. There's a lot of factors. It's a complex thing. There's, and if you ask somebody, why did you quit? You're almost asking the wrong question, because you're trying to get a single answer to something that very probably doesn't have a single answer. But in my opinion, the one you really want to focus, the right question is not what made you decide to leave. The question is, what made you decide to look? So that's what Mobley and friends would call intention to search. And so I think what often happens is, you're in a position and, you may be thinking about quitting, but there typically is an event that occurs, something changes, something happens, and that's what makes you say, I think I'm going to look on LinkedIn, or I'm going to look at, a website, or talk to people or whatnot. And that's what I would do, is if you're trying to understand why people are leaving, is get to that question. Why did people start looking rather than why did they quit? Because this complex thing about leaving or staying, the other company offers $20,000 raise, and all these other things that make it just very hard to control. But there probably was, a particular person, maybe a supervisor, maybe a coworker. I mean, there was something that made them start to look, and I think that's probably the big news from all this, is that there was some other research. So there was research by some guys, Jaros, Hermier, Kohler, and Sinkich, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. I haven't met any of these guys. That was some 1993 research. And what they did is they combined both those, like the attitudinal and the behavioral, and they did all the math, blah blah blah. The real interesting point of their paper, in my opinion, at any rate, was they identified that there is something called a withdrawal tendency, and that sort of individual where some people are simply more inclined to move on than others, and that can be a factor too. So it's one thing if you have an employee who really has only worked at a couple places, and everywhere he's been, he stayed there for 10 years, and when that person leaves your organization, that's probably somebody with a low withdrawal tendency, and that's probably really should be a concern. If you have somebody, when you look at their resume, and they'd never been anywhere more than 2 years and they quit, I'm not sure that's time to do a lot of soul searching. So that's valuable to realize that you probably shouldn't be worried about every resignation with the same level. It's the people that have been there, who tend to be at places a long time. They may not be at your place a long time. In fact, if they're at a lot of places a long time and then they come to your place and quit after a short time, now that's time to do some soul searching. That probably is very symptomatic of something's up with your organization. Another thing is there was some newer research by Klein, Malloy, and Brinsfield. They tried to rethink how to think about commitment. And then a couple years later, in 2014, they proposed a model, and it's called the CUT scale. That's Klein, Cooper, Malloy, and Swenson. So a lot of the similar guys and gals. But what was really fascinating about their work is two things. First of all, it's the name CUT stands for Klein et al. Unidimensional target free. And what this bit about target free is you can use the same scale they developed for commitment to your department, commitment to your boss, commitment to the company, commitment to the group, commitment to the industry. So the idea of target free is this scale doesn't just measure one kind of thing. It can be used in a lot of ways. And you just sort of change a few words in the survey and you can measure a different thing. And they fully recognize that your commitment to the company and your commitment to the boss may be very different. And so that that isn't, somebody can quit a boss without really quitting a company. They can just want to transfer divisions. And so if you have a lot of people who are going from your department to a different department, that's a time you need to be doing some soul searching, and there may be some issues to kind of why aren't people committed to you. Any rate, what that comes down to then is there is 4 items. So if you were using this to be for the company, so maybe you're looking at are people likely to leave the company? How committed are you to the company? To what extent do you care about the company? How dedicated are you to the company? And to what extent have you chosen to be committed to the company? Those may sound all similar, and they certainly are, but they're what Klein and his friends have done is they've validated with over, they had 5,300 participants. I mean, this is an enormous study. And what they validated is by asking those 4 questions, you can get a very simple answer. And these questions all have, they're what's called Likert style questions. So the answers are not at all, slightly, moderately, quite a bit, or extremely. And just by sort of taking those 4 questions and giving those 5 choices of answers, you can get a really reliable measure of organizational commitment. And a thing I would recommend you do is you might even think about sort of like every quarter or twice a year or something, just give that to your people, or maybe some of your people. If you have a gigantic organization, give it 10%. If you have a department of 30 people, just ask them all to do it. But that's the sort of thing you can do periodically, and you can really see if track is commitment up, is commitment down. That can be some really useful thing, particularly as in the coming years. There's going to be a shortage of engineers. Job market's going to get very active, and that's where you're probably going to really start to feel the pain of you start losing people. At any rate, hopefully that's helpful. If you want some help measuring sort of these things, I'm available to help you with that. Tom@tomulrichconsulting.com. Tom@tomulrichconsulting.com. And that's also there you can find a complete list of all my videos. But at any rate, that's all I've got to say about organizational commitment for now. I'm Dr. Tom Ulrich, and I like to talk about leadership and engineering, and we'll talk to you next time.